So welcome everyone. My name is Taurus Alej, and thank you so much for joining us on our episode 2 of our SAP Garage Series 2022. Today's mission, we're going to be covering route traffic between SAP Cloud Integration tenants. Today we have my colleagues Max Streifeneder and Martin Frick. They'll be covering the mission today with some demos. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping announcements to make. Just for those who are interested in keeping up with some of the latest information, we have 2 webinars coming up on February the 8th. So if you're interested in understanding how to optimize and accelerate your business process automation for the intelligent enterprise, we'll be holding 2 sessions, one for those in the APJ, Asia Pacific and Japan time zones, and those in more amenable to the European and the Americas time zones. We'll be holding this twice. The link is there, and I'll put the link in the chat if you want to register yourselves. We also have a more wider session planned for you guys today, for you guys on February the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. This is a 3-day webinar series focusing on Rise with SAP on the first day, data to value on the second day, and integration and extension sessions on the third day. So you'll get to hear some great customer success stories. Some of our partners will be presenting there, and then we will have some deep dive sessions for you to get a little bit more hands-on enablement in some of our 30-minute breakout rooms. So if you're interested in joining that session, please do register. The link is there, and I will put that link as well in the chat. You are all part of the Customer Value Network, so if you want more information on the Customer Value Network, the link is there, and I'll put the link in the chat as well to get more of an understanding of what it is, and it's sort of a one-stop shop of information. We also host the practitioners forum. So we do have, if you're interested in the UX practitioners forum, as well as the Business Technology Platform practitioners forum, and you haven't signed up for those, you can sign up here and be part of our monthly call there as well, where you can get to hear customer success stories as well as SAP learning updates. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Max and Martin.
Sure, thank you. Am I allowed to share my screen already?
Yep.
Perfect. Let's give it a try if it works. Well,
yep, just let me know.
Perfect.
I can
All right.
Screen,
so thanks for introducing, and thanks everybody for joining today to this SAP Garage series about the Discovery Center mission, route traffic between SAP Cloud Integration tenants. Me and Martin will hopefully be showing you how to work through that mission and what to achieve in the next 55 minutes or more. As a German obligation, I've brought an agenda for you. On the one hand side, I'd like to give you a rough overview once again what we address with this Discovery Center mission, what challenges we want to solve, and what solution we have in place for you. Followed by one of the key components that is in this game called Azure Traffic Manager as a solution from Microsoft Azure. Followed by what's needed from your side if you want to do this Discovery Center mission. And then the main part of today's session is this live demo. We had this session already in the morning. We changed the approach slightly, as in we don't want to build it together with you, but we want to walk you through what we've already built. So the majority of the stuff is already in the system. We want to focus on the stuff that is probably completely new, rather than showing you the stuff once again, like setting up the SAP integration suite or SAP Cloud Integration that is described in so many places. After that, we also have some things that you probably want to keep in mind, because with that scenario, some side effects kick in, although we are still in favor of realizing that. And also we have seen customers realizing that, because there is a major upside of having this scenario in your system. For sure, at the end, we'll also have a couple of blog posts for you where you can also read afterwards what's the reason for the scenario, what's the challenges other customers faced. And for sure, we'll also hopefully have time, not like this morning, for your extensive Q&A. And we will hopefully have the answers. First of all, I'm Max, part of the so-called technical field enablement team in SAP's technology and innovation area. a solution expert, almost 7 years with SAP, 13 years experience in software development. And yeah, I like all things around cloud native and business technology platform. Just as a short disclaimer, I might not be the deepest expert in all the technologies we showed today or on BTP, but I would say I have a good broad knowledge about the solutions we're going to show you today, and hopefully can not only connect the dots in this session, but further on. Martin, do you shortly want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining, first of all. My name is Martin. I'm in the same team as Max is in the technical field enablement. I'm with SAP since about 5 years, working for a consulting company, 3 years, and then since about 2 years at SAP now. Come from an analytics background, but I really found my passion in the BTP, and that's why I love to drive these BTP topics together with the team here. Thank you.
Martin, what I totally forgot to address, what's in a single sentence, what's our job in the technical field enablement team?
Yeah, to drive the adoption of the BTP with cool and amazing use cases like this here, which we're going to show today.
All right, so let me quickly jump over to the next slide. So I'd directly like to start with, we'll get rid of slides relatively soon, but to set the stage, imagine if you have SAP Cloud Integration as one of the capabilities of SAP Integration Suite in one of your sub-accounts. In this case, we have a sub-account in West Europe, EU20, and in our productive environment, customers do have, or not only customers, but also in this case, we have a single cloud integration tenant in the productive environment. So cloud integration is able to handle messages in a couple of ways. For example, clients can proactively send, via GPS, for instance, messages to cloud integration. So that cloud integration is then handling, mapping the values or whatever cloud integration is supposed to do. The main part here is that the client does have a particular URL for that, for the runtime or where to send the messages to. As you can see, the URL contains the region. In this case, it's EU20. There might be a few cases, or we've seen cases where the cloud integration tenant is tasked with an extraordinary high load, or there are cases where the cloud integration tenant is not able to handle the messages for certain reasons. For example, also a maintenance window on a weekend or something like that. If that is the case, okay, my slide is not moving further, the messages from the clients get lost. And that's what you definitely want to avoid, because lost messages might impact your business, or most likely will impact your business. That's why we have came up with a solution where you duplicate your setup in a sense. And let me quickly introduce you what we built here. It might be overwhelming in the beginning. So what we had is a sub-account in EU20 with a cloud integration tenant. What we additionally now have is a sub-account in US20 with another cloud integration tenant, with a separate one. As we had the case when the cloud integration tenant in West Europe is not able to handle the messages coming from the client, that's why this connection is red, another tenant might jump in and handle these messages. So the one in US20, for example. But as I've already told you, the URL might change for that. And what you definitely want to avoid is that clients do have to exchange the target URL or the endpoints manually, or even have to identify if one of the tenants is not able to handle the messages. So what you could simply do in a manual manner is to exchange the URL, US20, and probably a name of the sub-account, secondary, whatever, give it to the client. Hey, please send the messages to another tenant. That takes time, it's manual effort, cumbersome, and tedious. That's why we have came up with a solution where we have two additional components. One is the Azure Traffic Manager, that I'll explain in a second what it actually does, or what the task of the Azure Traffic Manager is, and a custom domain. As you can see it here, for example, my.cloudintegration.com, and then again, the integration flow that should be called in SAP Cloud Integration. So instead of having two different URLs, the client only knows one. Therefore, the second component, or the second additional component we have, is the custom domain service in both of the SAP accounts. We'll map these endpoints here to the custom domain, and Azure Traffic Manager then takes care of which tenant is actually able to handle the messages and takes care that none of the messages get lost in an automatic manner without any additional effort from your side, besides the initial effort in configuring the Azure Traffic Manager. That's one of the first challenges we've seen at customers, that one of the tenants probably doesn't or isn't able to handle the messages because of different reasons. Martin, I know that you also have a challenge in a place that you want to introduce us to.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Let's check out another interesting challenge or use case for setting up such an intelligent routing scenario. So let's go back one step and imagine again, there's only one CI tenant provisioned to the here West Europe landscape. And now two users from different locations of this planet Earth try to access our tenant, like one come from the US and one from Germany. As the German users are much closer to the server, the latency is probably going to be much lower for the German user as for the US user. Of course, assuming that all other conditions like, I don't know, internet connection are similar. Here it's just fictional numbers, but I think you get the challenge of geolocational distance and the higher latency when you're further away or far away from the server. So let's see how such a scenario could be improved with intelligent routing and using the Azure Traffic Manager in between. So the solution diagram here looks quite similar. We've again two cloud integration tenants in different regions and one traffic manager instance. But this time it's not one user who tries to access the tenant, but as said, we have got two users now from different continents. And in this scenario, the traffic manager is configured a little bit differently. Like in this case, the traffic manager not checks for failover, like is the one system available or not, but the first and foremost checks for the latency of the cloud integration tenants. And in this case, the German user, for example, will be routed by the Azure Traffic Manager to the West Europe tenant, whereas the US user will be routed to the West tenant of the United States. And as you might guess, the Azure Traffic Manager, assuming all other conditions are equal, is probably going to take or pick the closest tenant, as the latency will be probably much lower here. Again, just fictional numbers, but I think you got the point. Like this will drastically reduce the latency of the US user here in this scenario. So you could even imagine now like advanced scenarios, like combining both options, like first checking which tenant is available and then forwarding to the tenant with the lowest latency. Like something like this would for sure also be possible, but let's check out before we build up further stuff, how to set up all these things and what's required to set up all our intelligent routing scenarios. So first of all, Max already had explained this, so I'm not going to go through the list like we see on the screen, but pick out the points in a different order, but it shouldn't matter. Like first of all, and this is pretty important for our use case, you will need our own public domain. Like in our use case, we just register a public domain in Azure DNS. And as the client shall not notice to which cloud integration tenant is being redirected, so is it US, APJ, EU, or whatever, all clients shall always use the same domain to access the cloud integration services, no matter where they enter. Like otherwise, it would be very complicated to update scripts and stuff manually whenever the client changes. So they always want to have one domain which you can access, and this is why we need our own public domain in this case. It's the job of the actual Azure Traffic Manager instance to resolve the correct routing in the backend. So the user just uses one domain and Azure Traffic Manager routes him to the correct cloud integration tenant. Furthermore, you must be able to maintain DNS records for your own domain so that we are able to set up this scenario to a full extent. On the BTP side, furthermore, we will need, of course, two cloud integration suite tenants in different regions. You can even like 3, 4, 5, however you want. And furthermore, as Max already explained, you will need two instances of the custom domain service or the respective quota to set up these instances. This is required to make your public domain known in the BTP environment so that you can create so-called custom domain within your BTP environment and create custom routes. So you can map your cloud integration URL provided by BTP to your own domain. Otherwise, you will face a certificate error if you haven't done that. And obviously, yeah, Azure Traffic Manager, you will need that. This is probably the central component for this whole thing, which we're setting up here. And some check endpoints or auxiliary endpoints, they're called here, which allow us to do the actual check if the tenant is available, or to check if the latency of the cloud integration tenant. So we will set this up in the course of this demo. And this will be used by Azure Traffic Manager to check to check the endpoint and to determine the correct routing, depending on whether you check on availability or on the latency issue. Yeah, before we start with the demo, I think, Max, you can give us a few more input on the Azure Traffic Manager. Is that right?
Sure. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the Azure Traffic Manager already, but what is it really? And how can it help us? So the Azure Traffic Manager, as we've seen it, because we mentioned already a couple of times that domains and endpoints are involved, is actually nothing else than a DNS offered by Azure. DNS as in, or for domain name system. But now, as you know, DNS means always I give in a domain and probably it's resolved to something under the hood on a network level, not just a plain DNS, but additionally with a policy engine. What do I mean with policy engine? That we can maintain certain rules, as we've seen it in the first challenge we had with failover or high availability, that we route traffic to other tenants up on the availability. You can maintain a rule or policy, hey, whenever one tenant is not available, route it to the other one. Or another policy would be, hey, please check the latency of the tenants. And depending on the latency, please route the traffic to the corresponding tenant on the BTP. And with that, if we have a look at the flow diagram, the very simplistic flow diagram on the right-hand side, a user gives in something like our custom domain that we've bought from Azure, for example, to Azure Traffic Manager, resolves that DNS based on the policies, and gives back the tenant URL of the cloud integration runtime that should handle the messages. All of that happens automatically and under the hood, so the user can actually see what tenant was answering, but doesn't really know because everything happens automatically. With that, as we've already mentioned, you're able to handle different scenarios, load balancing the traffic between different tenants based on the latency, for example, so performance-based, priority-based, high availability, or failover scenarios, and so on and so on. But with that, I think we had enough theory already. I would rather go into the Discovery Center and into the system to show you what we have for you. Alrighty, so I already have the Discovery Center open. Let me just disappear that Zoom control here. That's the mission we are talking about. I already started the mission. And what you can see is not only the use case, what we are talking about with much more context, but also the project board with the steps that you need to do in order to achieve this scenario. There's some things in the beginning, how to get started, make yourself familiar with the SAP Integration Suite and SAP Cloud Integration. That was kind of like an assumption of us that you already know that. But then we get started with setting up the SAP Cloud Integration tenant, or before subscribing to SAP Integration Suite, and then getting started with actually preparing it for this scenario. To be honest, since we only have a couple of minutes, I'd like to emphasize the things that are probably more interesting and not, well, interesting is all of that, I'd say, but the stuff with subscribing to the SAP Integration Suite and enabling SAP Cloud Integration is described in so many places, and I would rather emphasize the other steps here. What I can show you is that we have a sub account in AP20 in this case with a integration suite subscription already. We have a custom domain service instance and one service instance of the integration runtime, so that you have access to the integration flows. And I have exactly the same setup in US20. And I already spotted a little bit of it. Give me a second. All right, we have the same setup with the SAP Integration Suite subscription, a custom domain service instance, and a process integration runtime instance. That's it for the setup. As I said, everything is described in the Discovery Center. My session has expired. You can read all of that thoroughly and in your pace in GitHub. But as I said, I'd rather like to skip that here and emphasize the other steps needed for the scenario. And I'm sure, Martin, that you will probably give us a little bit of insight that we have called auxiliary endpoint or monitoring endpoint. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So I'll share a screen and you should see the GitHub.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
How did you get there?
It's magic. Now I opened the mission and I could just click on the respective step, and then I lined up here in the GitHub where I can find out how to configure the monitoring of the auxiliary or check endpoints, which Azure Traffic Manager uses to check if our cloud integration tenants are available, or for latency checks, for example. So I will show you how to set up these endpoints in cloud integration quickly. We have already done that, but I show you in theory how it would work. And one important thing when setting up the process integration runtime, which you should take a look at, and then we will check if things work out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our cloud integration tenant. So in this case, it's US 20, and I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. So, oh, that's too big. So there you can see it. First, what you need to do is you need to import the package which we provided you. You can just download it from the GitHub, and it contains the integration flow which we require for the check endpoints. And in this package, once you upload it, there will be an artifact like this check or auxiliary monitoring endpoint. It's called ping in here, and it does nothing else than when it's triggered, it returns a success message like a status 200 and an information, just plain text, where we're coming from, like in this case from US 20. So we can later on check that things work. As you can see, we've deployed this integration flow to the tenant, like just hit deploy, and it should be available in your tenant within a few minutes. It might take a little bit longer for the first time, but then it should be within the deployed integration flows. You can see it here. So this ping endpoint or this monitoring endpoint is available using this domain here. So to allow Traffic Manager access to this endpoint, we will need to set up the process integration runtime. That's also pretty well described in the GitHub here. Just one thing you need to keep in mind when doing that, I'll just quickly show you. Once you set it up, so it's quick and easy, like every other service instance. You just select a service instance, you give it a friendly name, I don't know, integration, whatever, flow, and then click on next, and then make sure you copy the JSON which we provide in the GitHub, which will allow us a few more grant types. So we can also use, for example, password-based login, and then click on next and create, and you should be fine. I have done that already. So this is the instance which we created, and what you need to do next is to give Azure Traffic Manager access to this integration flow. API access, you will need to create a service key, which will provide you, I'll make that a little bit bigger, the client ID and the client secret, which can be used to access the process integration runtime. And I'd say let's try that out for our AP20 region. So I've done the same stuff, which you've just seen also in the AP20 region. And what you can do once you have configured this all and you deployed the integration flow, the ping endpoint, you can just execute a curl command and then ping this endpoint via your console, and you will see that you get back this little text message which we configured in the integration flow here in this scenario from AP20. But if you would use the EU or US 20 tenant in this case, then we would get hello from US 20. And this is how we later going to check if the failover really works. Okay, now we ensure that our integration flow monitoring endpoints are reachable for the traffic manager. So what we need to do now is we need to set up our custom domain in BTP. This allows our BTP service to be reachable using your own domain. As we said, we want to make our integration tenants reachable using the same domain, so the user doesn't even notice he's going to be redirected to US or to Asia Pacific or US or whatever. And therefore, we need to register a domain in BTP, and we need to prove that we really own this domain by uploading a valid certificate. And I will show you how this can be done. And then we will also create this custom domain route to then really ensure that our cloud integration tenant is reachable using this custom domain. As this process takes quite some time, I have recorded that stuff for you. I hope for today, this is the only recording which we show, but I will just play that here because we couldn't manage that to get this done in time. So the first thing you need to do, obviously, is you need to install the Cloud Foundry CLI, because this stuff is done with Cloud Foundry CLI. A quick remark here, things might change in the future. There will be a web UI for this process, and we will update the GitHub as soon as possible, but you should probably still be able to do this via the CLI. And once you download it, the CLI, install it, please also make sure that you install the custom domain plugin. We see it here, as this is a plugin for the Cloud Foundry CLI to get access to the custom domain commands within the CLI. So we've done that already here. Once you've done that, install the plugin, you can just log into your target sub account and your target space. In this case, it's been done for EU10. And once you're logged in, you can create a custom domain service instance. I'll just use a little notepad here to get sure I've got no special characters in the copied strings. And yeah, just hit that command, put it in your console, and the custom domain service will be created in your sub account. Yeah, you can check if the creation was successful by saying CF service custom domain, and you see, yeah, the create has succeeded. So your custom domain service is available in this sub account now. So now what you can do is you can create a domain and add it to your sub account. Now you just take the public domain which you bought, or I don't know, at Azure or somewhere else, and register it within your BTP environment. But just saying, okay, CF create domain, your sub account, and then the actual domain which you want to register for that sub account. Okay, that's it. Quite easy. Yeah, you can then hit CF domains and check, okay, this has been added to your available domains besides the SAP standard domains of the BTP environment. So to really make use of this domain now, you have to prove that you're the owner of this domain. And therefore, the first thing you need to do is you need to create a private and public key pair for this domain, which allows you to create a certificate signing request and then obtain a certificate for that domain and to upload that to prove that you're the owner of the domain. So this is pretty straightforward, like CF, take the correct custom domain or the command to create this key pair, providing your domain here with an asterisk to have all available subdomains included. And yeah, just provide company information and a location. And then you should be able to create this key pair, which you require. So that's what we're going to do now. Here in the command line, once again, he asked me if I really want to create that key pair for that domain. I say, sure, yeah, this is what I want to do. And the key pair is created. So the next thing I need to do is I need to create a certificate signing request for that key using the command, which is also here available in the GitHub. You just take it, paste it in, and a certificate signing request will be created, and it will also be downloaded in the location where you executed this CF command on your device. So you will see you've got the certificate signing request here as a file, which you can now use to sign this certificate signing request. Therefore, in our case, we used Let's Encrypt. This is a free option to get a valid SSL certificate. And in this case, we also need the so-called certbot, which is the tool communicating with Let's Encrypt here, and where we can upload the certificate signing request to ask Let's Encrypt to sign this certificate signing request for us. So please download the certbot to do so. There's a little tool which you can download using the explanations in here. And then what you need to do is you need to tell them once more what's your domain. An email address needs to be given. And yeah, that's it actually. Then you can execute the command. You see it here. In this case, we use the staging environment of let's encrypt in the productive scenario. Please use also the real without the staging in here in the string. This has been just for demonstration purposes. But once you do that, let's encrypt will ask you to provide or to prove that you're the owner of this domain. And in this case, we used the so-called DNS challenge, where we need to provide an additional text record in our DNS, which belongs to this domain. So what we did, we just went to Azure to the DNS, which we registered here. So here again, we can see our custom domain, and now we need to register a new text record for this domain. So we can really prove that we are the owner of this domain, and this will allow us, or will prove let's encrypt that they can sign the certificate sign request for us and give us back a valid certificate, which is valid for 3 months. That's good to know. Like, it's free, but it's only valid for 3 months. So you need to refresh it every 3 months if you choose to take let's encrypt. So we created it in here. So this new text record, which let's encrypt can now read and find. And once we've done that, we press enter, and we should get back our certificate chain. Yeah, so let's encrypt creates 3 files. The one most interesting for us is the 001_chain, which contains almost the whole certificate chain, including our final certificate for the server. And there's one more step which needs to be done. So this is what we've done in the last steps. Just go through it on your own when you implement that. And here's step 16. That's quite important because you need to add a further root certificate, which is provided by Let's Encrypt, to the certificate chain. Just add it to the very bottom of the 001_chain file and save it as, in our case, we just say, okay, certificate1.pem, and saved it. So this is our signed certificate, which you can now upload to BTP, and which will allow us then to finally use really the custom domain within BTP, as we've proven that we're really the owner of this domain. So they asked me once again, are you sure you want to upload this? And there's still one step to come where I then have to activate this key pair, which I created before, like here, step 19. But then once I've done that, I'm able to use this custom domain, in our case, saptfe-demo.com, to create custom routes using this domain for our BTP services. So it takes a while to activate it, and you can check it using cfcdl command, and you see, okay, activation progress. Takes some time, but once it's activated, you will see a screen like this here, like custom domain status activated. And then you can create a custom route for your cloud integration tenant, where to get the runtime URL. So this is the URL where you can reach your integration flows. You can either go to integration runtime, get it from there, or from the integration cloud integration tenant itself. Just copy it. Like we can see here. I think I removed the HTTPS. It's not required here. And then you can say, okay, I want to map my cloud integration URL to the following subdomain of my custom domain, in this case, cloudintegration.saptfe-demo.com. And now I can reach my cloud integration tenant using this custom domain if I like. Okay, I still have to set one DNS record for that custom domain within my DNS zone, forwarding it to the API endpoint of Cloud Foundry of the sub account here, but then I could reach my cloud integration tenant using that custom subdomain. This is just another overview here. You can see all the custom domain commands again, and you see the route status is active. Perfect, that's what we want. So now we can go on and let the traffic manager access this environment which we configured here. I think that's it for, it's probably the most complicated part of the whole tutorial, but once you've set this up, you can always use it for any other BTP service you would like and make them reachable using your own custom domain. Well, then I'd say I hand it over to you, Max, to show us how the actual traffic manager can be configured now.
Sure. Thank you, Martin, for the tricky part, I would say. Everything else is just, I would say, bonus. No, I mean, it's the most important part to configure the Azure Traffic Manager then, but creating the certificates and mapping the domains is oftentimes a little tricky and time consuming, I would say. So we have prepared our cloud integration environment. We have mapped the routes to the custom domain already, and now comes in the the Azure Traffic Manager profile, it's called. I've already created it. It's relatively less effort. I've created it using the UI, but if you're interested, if we go back to the Discovery Center, there's also two options how to create that profile. Once on the one hand side with the Azure portal, but on the other hand, also using infrastructure as a code, for example, using Terraform and without any clicks in the UI, for example, if you want to integrate it sometimes into your pipelines or whatever it is. I usually work with Terraform because I can provision and just deprovision stuff on the fly whenever I need it. But having a look at the result, the profile contains is containing two different sections. On the one hand side, it's the configuration part, where we can define how the monitoring actually works. And I explained it in a nutshell. Azure Traffic Manager can be configured in different ways, as we had two different challenges, for example, failover or high availability. Whatever you define it, there's like minor differences, I would say. Oftentimes, folks are not entirely sure if it's high availability or failover. The routing method in this case is called priority. For Martin's scenario with the latency, we, for example, can define, hey, please check the performance to the tenants. And therefore, the routing method would be called performance, but you can also use weighted for load balancing the load. So one tenant get 80% of the load, the other one 20%. But also geographical decisions like all requests coming from a certain region in Europe or from Germany should only go to the tenant in West Europe, or things like that. Further on, we have defined a DNS time to live, TTL. That means how long the DNS entry is actually valid or how often it should be refreshed. In this case, for demoing purposes, we said we want to have the lowest number as possible. In this case, we define 1 second. So later on, Martin will show you how to simulate that scenario. One tenant is not available, and therefore we don't want to wait like a couple of minutes until that kicks in. So the endpoint monitor setting, as you can see, we have HTTPS and the port 443 for our path HTTP ping. Where does it come from? If I jump to one of the cloud integration tenants, as you can see, the integration flow that Martin has showed you, where the integration flow is actually just replying with hello from US20 or AP20, is our monitoring endpoint. That's why I've defined it as HTTP ping, because it's for both endpoints the same path. So if we jump over to AP20, you can also see that the path is exactly the same. All right. We do have an expected status. That means that's the identifier for Azure Traffic Manager to find out if a tenant is online or not. If we call the cloud integration tenant authenticated, that's what I'm going to show you also in a second. The expected status, HTTP status, is 200. Everything else than 200 is counted as this tenant is not available. Also, there's some settings how often this endpoint is called. For example, the probing interval every 10 seconds, and the tolerated number of phases after the first error-prone call or erroneous call, the tenant should be counted as degraded, as the naming is in Azure Traffic Manager. All right, that's how the monitoring is called. But then there's also, as you've probably already seen it in a nutshell, different endpoints in this Azure Traffic Manager profile. As you can see, both of them are already online. And our US21 is US20 tenant is counted as priority 1. So that's our primary tenant, and AP20 is with configured as priority 2. If you go in here and have a look at the configuration of one of the endpoints, you can see that we have a external endpoint. That means it's somewhere else. There are also so-called Azure endpoints where you can directly configure to Azure artifacts, like an Azure function or something, with the target. And if we have a look over us20.ip.cpi rt us20 whatever is actually exactly the runtime URL as you can see it in one of the deployed integration flows. And now comes the interesting part. We have a custom header. That means, as Martin has shown you in the terminal a couple of seconds or a couple of minutes ago, he was using curl, the runtime URL, -u, and then concatenated the client ID plus the client secret of the service key. And I jump back in this for a second. That wasn't planned this way. I'm in AP20 now. We have a service key over here. And if we, for example, jump over, I will demonstrate that in a second. And try that. Where am I? The client ID. Column, the client secret. And while I'm doing that, I just want to show you that we will rotate the credentials afterwards. So you can give it a try, but you won't succeed with using our credentials. And that's actually the base 64 encoded string that we use as authentication in this custom header setting here. And that's how Azure Traffic Manager can call the endpoints authenticate. All right, that's more or less what we do see here. There's one thing left. Until now, as you can see, the Azure Traffic Manager profile has a DNS name, but we are using a custom domain from that we have registered in Cloud Foundry. How do we connect the dots here? So we have bought a domain from Azure, but there's also the possibility to do that in other domain providers. It's exactly the same behavior, but if we have a look at the domain, it's saptfe-demo.com. There should be a DNS entry pointing to the DNS entry of Traffic Manager. And after that, if my Azure portal is loading the entries, Azure Traffic Manager is resolving that DNS to the actual endpoint. As you can see, that's the custom domain Martin has shown you. Cloud Integration.saptfe-demo.com is a so-called canonical name resolving to, if we expand that here, Cloud Integration failover trafficmanager.net. That's the DNS that you have seen a couple of seconds ago in the Traffic Manager profile. And just to prove that this is working the other way around, I'll do a short DNS lookup and prove that this is actually working. So I do an DNS lookup to cloudintegration.saptfe-demo.com. That's the custom domain that we are using in both of our SAP accounts in Cloud Foundry. And as you can see, this is resolved first to the Traffic Manager. And Traffic Manager is then, based on the policy, resolving it to an actual runtime URL in our BTP sub account with also the IP address in Cloud Foundry. So that's it for the theoretical part. Theoretical compared to what you are definitely now showing us, Martin. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. So let's see if things works out. So what we're going to do now, Max just has showed this to you. Like what you can also do, you can just call it endpoint like here in your browser. You can see up here like cloud integration.sap tfe-demo.com, and I edit this http/ping, and I get it back hello from US20 as our primary tenant is up. So what we're going to do now is we just undeploy, like we fake the availability and remove it from the US20 tenant and say, okay, our check endpoint is not available. And this will lead to the following. If we go to the Azure Traffic Manager now, the monitor status of our US20 Cloud Integration tenant should change. Might take a few seconds as we, I don't know if you configure 10 or 30 seconds, but now you see the monitor status changed to degraded. So this now should lead to a failover to the AP20 region. And if I now call the URL once again, like just the same URL as before, cloudintegration.subtv-demo.com/http ping, I hope I get back an AP20 now. So let's see. Yeah, you see the failover worked, pinging this monitoring endpoint, which returns us a little text message, now leads to the AP20 tenant. So just to prove that things work. Okay, so let's sum it up. I'll just quickly go to our last slides. Side effects and things to keep in mind when setting up such a scenario. Because there was also asked in the chat, maybe I can take this away right here. For sure, if you set up multiple independent SAP Cloud Integration tenants, you need to make sure that things are in sync. Like one thing is the security artifacts, but also the integration content, like integration flows. I know, Max, there are approaches to do it for the security artifacts. I don't know if you can spend a few more words on that later. But for the integration content, like integration flows, I can just guide you to this little slide here. So to keep the integration flows in sync for multiple cloud integration tenants, you can use Cloud Transport Management. And there's even a GitHub available in our mission here, which you can find, which explains you how to set this up for your test environment and how to keep your tenants, or at least the integration artifacts, in sync. Another thing to keep in mind is timer-based integration flows. So in case you set up 3, 4, 5, I don't know, integration tenants now, just make sure that timer-based integration flows don't start like twice, 3, 4, 5 times a day, depending on the different time zones your integration tenants are located in. So have a special eye on timer-based integration flows. Yeah, for security artifacts, I'm sure Max can say something in the Q&A if there are questions. And one major thing which we want to mention here is like the high available scenario for the cloud integration is fine and nice, but you also need to make sure that your backend systems, for example, which you access, are high available. Like there's no use in a high available cloud integration scenario if your S/4HANA system is not available for both tenants, for example. Yeah, so these are just some side effects and things to keep in mind, which we want to mention here. And I'd say, Max, yeah, let's finish things up.
Sure. Regarding, if you want to jump back for a second to your slide, just adding a few comments, exactly this one. What we did is synchronizing the integration content that is part of the Discovery Center mission already. What's missing is, for example, the security artifacts. There are ways of using OData APIs of the cloud integration tenant to push security artifacts, but the other way around, I've tested it quite a couple of times. I'm not entirely sure if it works, or it should rather be avoided extracting security artifacts in plain text, if you know what I mean. And there is not yet content for that. I've tried it using different automation tools, like for example, the SAP automation pilot, that you store the credentials somewhere externally, like in the B2B credential store, and then pushing it from one central place into different tenants. As in for the time-based integration flow, what I wanted to add, just one comment is, if you transport the time-based flows that you had in the past, they will also start synchronously in both the tenants, or in our scenario, in both the tenants or in all the tenants. That's why you would also need to externalize the schedule mechanism. And just to add a disclaimer, I haven't tried it yet, to be honest, but that should be externalized somehow in another scheduling framework. Also, like the SAP automation pilot, to call these flows via HTTP rather than schedule it from within SAP Cloud Integration. Just as my 2 cents to that. But yes, if you want to go to the last slides. Also, that is in the Discovery Center. I know it was kind of like rushing through. We couldn't cover as much live as we wanted it to be within 30 minutes, to be honest. If you want to do the mission or if you have problems, just hit us up. There is a messaging function in the Discovery Center. Also, social media or I think the email addresses at the end of the presentation are also ways to contact us, and we are happy to help all the time. Also, you were too fast, Martin, as usual. There are 2 blog posts by our valued colleague from Microsoft, Martin Pankros, which we are working together about 2 different ways. The first one is a little bit more sophisticated with Azure Front Door instead of Azure Traffic Manager that acts not on a DNS level, but on a networking level. But also the second one covers the theoretical aspects in more detail, what it is all about. Other than that, we have around about 10 minutes left, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. I'm not entirely sure if we can answer all of them. As I said, we are not the product expert for cloud integration, but we are happy to try our best or get back with answers after this meeting.
Fantastic, Max. Fantastic, Martin. Thanks so much. We do have a question. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, an audio question, please do raise your hand in the app. Virtually raise your hand, and I'll call on you to unmute your line. If not, you can also continue to type your questions in the chat. So we do have an audio question. So Vijay, if you want to unmute your line and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. I mean, this is useful. I did come across this use case in one of the OpenSAP trainings as well. But one question is, with respect to CPI, how my high availability or disaster recovery is implemented by SAP, or is it on the customers? One thing that I am really worried about is we have one production tenant, and then that's running fully on and everything. And then there are maintenance cycles and it's going down. And then I do not have my integration up and running. I understand this second tenant being there, but that's an additional licensing on the company. So does SAP, as part of Cloud Foundry implementation, do you provide HA at all? Or every customer have to think on themselves to have multiple production tenants available and then a traffic manager configured so that there is always integration up and running?
Martin, I guess that's
I can start.
Or
you want to
give it a try.
Yeah, we share. I mean, we had the same question before, and it was also in the chat. So we know that the product management, they're working on that stuff to make the cloud integration tenant available in a certain region across multiple availability zones. The scenario which we cover here is really focusing on cross-region high availability, which is currently not in scope as far as I know. But I don't know about the roadmap, the exact date or when this will be published, at least for the cross availability zones within a region. But this is definitely something which is probably coming from the product themselves, from cloud integration. But I know these guys, I think about it, and I don't know how far they progress. But Max, do you have any additional information on that?
The multi-AC high availability roadmap, I've been just posted it into the chat, is planned for Q2 2022. But you're totally right, Vijay. Once it comes to, I'm not a total expert when it comes to the product itself, but as far as I know, that doesn't cover maintenance windows. So once you face maintenance windows, you definitely want to make sure that you probably have this setup in place. But that also means, you're totally right, that you have to license more tenants.
Right. Yeah. It's just for a dormant tenant, I'll be paying full licensing and all that. So yeah.
Yeah, entirely right.
Totally understand. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for the question, Vijay. If there's anybody else that has an audio question, please do raise your hand, and I'll call on you to unmute your line, or you can continue typing the session. So it looks like there's a question in the chat. Chris, you sent the question to me directly. I will send you the jam page where you can get the actual PowerPoint. It's not a jam page. I did put the link in the chat. So if you look up a few entries in the chat, there is a link to our Garage welcome page, and there you should be able to see all the presentation material. I'll be uploading that once Max and Martin send me their presentation. I will upload that to our site. And you can find our recording. I usually upload that on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and type in SAP Garage, you'll see all of the recordings, but if you want to specifically look for this one, just SAP Garage 2022, episode 2, you'll be able to find that. But I will be sending you guys the link to where you can find it on this page. Okay.
I just saw one other question from the chat history, which was asked like this. No, I've lost it. Now, is it possible to use other cloud TTM services instead of Azure Traffic Manager? We had this question also in the morning. Yeah, there are. If you look at AWS or GCP, they're also probably offering similar services, which you could also use for building such a scenario. We've started with the Azure example now, but maybe in the future we will also cover further scenarios how to do that with AWS or GCP, for example. But the process and the product offerings should also be there, so you can give it a try in these environments.
Great.
Yeah, the services are namely AWS Route 53 and Google Cloud DNS or Google Cloud Load Balancer. They are not exactly the same as Azure Traffic Manager, so it might get a little tricky transferring the content, but that's definitely feasible.
Okay, so we do have 4 more minutes, but I see that there's somebody raising his hand. So Deepak, if you want to unmute your line. There's also a question in the chat, Martin and Max.
So my quick question is that since we are for this HA thing and disaster recovery, we have 2 tenants. So is there a better way to keep these tenants in sync? Because, suppose we have so much of effort configuring one tenant for a particular iFlow. Now, again, second tenant, we have to deploy these 2 things. It's a parallel work. And always there is something that's going to be missing.
Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't found an easier way for keeping that in sync. When you set up the cloud transport management, that might at least take some effort away from keeping the integration flows in sync, but there is no integrated solution to keep the tenants in sync, as far as I know. So setting up cloud transport management might probably be the easiest way as of today.
In any way, I mean, if you have a test tenant and a production tenant, that might be best practice anyway. And if you transfer
test tenant is definitely a separate thread, right? So if I have 2 production tenants, I want to keep them in sync. Is there a better way to do
Sure.
it? You guys?
Sure. What I was just talking about, if you have a test tenant and a production tenant, you definitely, or as a best practice, want to transfer from test to production using cloud transport management. And if you have that transport connection from one test to a production tenant, it's rather a short way or a no-brainer piece of a cake, whatever you want to name it, to have that second connection to the second productive tenant. That's how you keep them in sync rather than copying the stuff from one tenant to the other one, if you know what I mean.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Great.
2 more questions, like one, the backend integration to on-premise integration suite, like in-cloud integration, that should be possible. Like you can just use the cloud connector. Once the cloud connector is configured, that's pretty easy. We've done that already, including principal propagation. So you can do that from cloud integration. And Max, yeah, I think this approach should also be applicable for SAP API management or other B2P services, as long as you assign a custom route. That should be doable.
One just came in from VJ.
The pain of switching the
I'm
tenant.
sorry, it's not a question, sorry. It's just my comment, that's all.
Okay. Great, so we do have 1 last minute. If you guys have any additional questions before we sign off until next month. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. So you do have Max's and Martin's contact information. So if you do want to reach out to them, if a question pops up in your mind after this call, you can always reach out to them or reach out to us, and we'll try to get you the answer. Thank you again, Max and Martin, for a great session. A lot of great information here. And again, if you want to test this out, all the links are available so that you can try this mission out. Thank you again, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this month. Join us again on in March. March the 2nd will be our next Garage series, episode 3. So join us then. Have a great morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you're located. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks
for
folks.
participating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.